What if you could stand before death himself and ask him a question that even the gods once struggled to answer? Thousands of years ago, an ancient Indian text told the story of a young boy named Nachiketa. He was sent to the realm of Yama, the lord associated with death. But when Nachiketa arrived, Yama was not there. So the boy waited. One night passed, then another, then a third, without food, without leaving, without knowing when death would return. When Yama finally came home, he found a young boy who had waited for him for 3 nights. And because Nachiketa had endured this as an honored guest, Yama offered him 3 wishes. Nachiketa could have asked for almost anything: wealth, long life, power, pleasure. But his 3rd wish was something completely different. He wanted to know, what happens to a person after death? And Yama did not want to answer. What followed became one of the most famous philosophical conversations in the ancient Indian tradition. This is the story of Nachiketa. The story appears in the Katha Upanishad, one of the principal Upanishads of Hindu philosophical literature. It begins with a man named Vayashravasa, who was performing a ritual in which gifts were being given to priests. Nachiketa was his young son. But as the boy watched the gifts being given away, he noticed something troubling. The animals being offered were not ideal gifts. The text describes them as cattle that had already grown old, animals that had exhausted their ability to produce milk and were no longer particularly useful. Nachiketa began to wonder about the meaning of the sacrifice, and then he asked his father a simple question. "Father, to whom will you give me?" His father did not answer. Nachiketa asked again, and then a 3rd time. Eventually, irritated by his son's repeated questioning, his father declared, "I give you to death." In Sanskrit, the phrase is associated with Yama, the Lord of Death. For the father, these words were spoken in anger. But Nachiketa took them seriously, and this is where the story takes an extraordinary turn. Instead of ignoring his father's words, Nachiketa went to the house of death. The Katha Upanishad does not give us a modern-style description of a journey through a supernatural underworld. Instead, it simply moves the story into the realm of Yama. And when Nachiketa arrives, Yama is not there. Imagine arriving at the home of death and discovering that death is away. Nachiketa waited. 1 night passed. He remained there. Another night passed. Still, Yama had not returned. Then came the 3rd night. The boy remained without food. The Katha Upanishad describes him as an honored guest who had stayed in Yama's house for 3 nights without eating. And in the ancient Indian tradition, an unexpected guest, especially a respected spiritual guest, was not someone to be treated casually. So when Yama finally returned, he recognized that Nachiketa had been left waiting. And Yama offered him 3 boons, 1 for each night. The text explicitly says that because Nachiketa had remained in Yama's house for 3 nights fasting, he could choose 3 boons. But Nachiketa's first request was not for himself. He asked for his father. Nachiketa asked that when he returned home, his father would no longer be angry with him. He wanted his father to recognize him again with affection. This is important. Nachiketa had been sent to death because his father was angry. Yet his first thought was not revenge. He didn't ask Yama to punish his father. He didn't ask for wealth. He asked for reconciliation. Yama granted the request. And then Nachiketa moved to his 2nd boon. This time, he asked about something much more spiritual. He wanted to know about the fire sacrifice that could lead to the heavenly world. Yama explained the ritual to him. Nachiketa listened carefully, and then he repeated the teaching back to Yama. According to the text, Yama was pleased by how accurately Nachiketa understood what he had been taught. The fire became associated with Nachiketa's name and is referred to as Nachiketa Agni in the text. But then Yama said something that changed the entire conversation. There was still one boon left, the third boon, and this was the question Nachiketa had really come for. Nachiketa asked, "What happens to a person after death?" The Katha Upanishad frames the question as an existing uncertainty. Some say that something remains after death. Others say that nothing remains. Nachiketa wanted Yama to teach him the truth. This was not a question about heaven. It wasn't simply, where do dead people go? It was much deeper. What is the nature of the self? What remains when the body dies? And is there something beyond death? Nachiketa had chosen a question that went directly to the heart of human existence. And Yama tried to make him choose something else. He told Nachiketa that this knowledge was subtle and difficult to understand. He even suggested that Nachiketa ask for another boon instead. But Nachiketa refused. The Katha Upanishad says that Nachiketa insisted because this was precisely the question he wanted answered. And then Yama tested him. Yama offered Nachiketa alternatives. He could have sons and grandsons. He could have a long life. He could have wealth. He could become a ruler. He could have horses and elephants. He could have gold. He could have whatever worldly pleasures a mortal might desire. The Katha Upanishad even describes Yama offering beautiful attendants, music, and chariots. In other words, Yama essentially offered the boy everything the material world could provide. And all Nachiketa had to do was give up his question. But Nachiketa saw something that the adults around him had not. All of those things had an expiration date. Wealth disappears. Youth disappears. Power disappears. Even the longest human life eventually ends. And if the person offering these things is death himself, then none of them can possibly be permanent. Nachiketa therefore refused. He told Yama that worldly pleasures are temporary and eventually wear down the senses. He did not want something that would simply disappear. He wanted the answer. What lies beyond death? This is the moment when the story stops being simply a supernatural tale and becomes a philosophical journey. Yama now begins to teach Nachiketa. One of the central ideas introduced in the Katha Upanishad is the distinction between what is pleasant and what is truly beneficial. In Sanskrit tradition, these are described as prayas and shreyas. The pleasant thing is what feels good now. The beneficial thing is what leads towards something deeper, and the two are not always the same. A person can choose comfort or understanding, immediate pleasure or long-term wisdom, wealth or knowledge. Nachiketa has already demonstrated which path he wants. He has seen the attraction of wealth and pleasure, and he has rejected it. Yama therefore tells him that Nachiketa has chosen wisely. He did not allow himself to be distracted by temporary desires. Instead, he pursued knowledge. And now Yama begins to explain the deepest subject of all, the Atman, the self. The central teaching of the Katha Upanishad is that the deepest self is not identical to the temporary body. The body changes. It grows old. It eventually dies. But the Atman, in the philosophical framework of the Upanishad, is described as beyond ordinary birth and death. This is where the story becomes much more philosophical than mythological. Yama is not simply telling Nachiketa what happens to a corpse. He is teaching him to distinguish between the temporary and the eternal. The person we normally think of as me is connected to the body, senses, thoughts, and desires. But the Upanishad asks us to look deeper. If everything about the body changes, what is the underlying self? And if the deepest self is not destroyed by physical death, then perhaps death does not mean what humans normally imagine it means. This is one of the reasons the dialogue between Nachiketa and Yama became so influential. The story uses a meeting with death to ask whether death can actually destroy the deepest reality of a person. Then comes one of the most famous images in the entire Katha Upanishad. Yama describes the human being using the metaphor of a chariot. The body is the chariot. The senses are compared to horses. The mind is the reins. And the intellect is the charioteer. The self is the passenger. Think about what this means. Imagine a chariot being pulled by wild horses. If the horses run wherever they want, the chariot will never reach its destination. But if the reins are controlled and the charioteer knows where to go, the journey becomes possible. The same idea applies to human life. Our senses constantly pull us toward things we want. Food, pleasure, possessions, attention, comfort, desire. But if the mind cannot control these impulses, the person becomes like a chariot being dragged in every direction. Nachiketa is being taught that wisdom requires control. Not rejection of life, but mastery over oneself. And the ultimate destination is not simply wealth or pleasure. It is knowledge of the self. Yama continues teaching Nachiketa about the path towards spiritual knowledge. The Katha Upanishad repeatedly returns to the idea that ordinary desires keep people attached to the temporary world. But the person who understands the deeper self can move beyond this cycle. This is where the concept of moksha, or liberation, enters the philosophical background of the text. The goal is not simply to live longer. After all, Nachiketa had already rejected the offer of an extraordinarily long life. The goal is to understand what is beyond temporary existence, and that is why the third boon was so important. Nachiketa didn't ask death how to avoid dying. He asked death to explain what death actually means. That is a very different question. Nachiketa began his journey as a young boy who asked his father an uncomfortable question. He ended it as a student receiving one of the deepest philosophical teachings of the Upanishadic tradition. He had stood before death. Death offered him wealth, power, pleasure, long life, and Nachiketa rejected them all because he understood something incredibly simple. Everything temporary eventually disappears, so he chose knowledge instead. And perhaps that is why this ancient story has survived for so long. Because everyone eventually faces the same question Nachiketa asked. What happens when this life ends? The Katha Upanishad does not answer that question with a simple story about a place called heaven or hell. Instead, it turns the question inward. What are we beneath the body? What is the self? And if the deepest part of who we are is not destroyed by death, then perhaps the greatest mystery isn't what happens after death. Perhaps the mystery is who we really are before death ever arrives. Nachiketa went looking for an answer from death. And what he received was something much bigger, a lesson about life itself.